Welcome to the WritersConnX panel, Conquering Contests and Prompts. Our panel this month will feature writers who understand the unique format of anthologies and the Open Novella Contest, which is often called the ONC, and writing to a prompt, including how to find the prompt that fits your writing style, how to make every word count in a novella, and how to stay motivated so you hit those word count milestones on time. So we're going to chat with the writers who have written for these contests and how they prepare for these tasks. Our first topic is, what is the Open Novella Contest and why should you participate? MB, you've been part of 6 ONC contests. Do you mind sharing what keeps bringing you back?
Absolutely. I think one of the things I enjoy the most about the ONC is because it takes me out of my comfort zone. Generally, when I write a novella for that contest, I try to find a prompt that will test me in a bit. And usually, where I'm normally a fantasy writer, I actually write more contemporary or mystery horror when I do the ONC, only because I feel like it's a way to get my feet wet in a different genre because it's such a shorter story with a specific schedule to it. I feel, for at least for me, when it's something that I'm not used to writing, not something I'm as comfortable writing, it does keep me better scheduled and better focused to proceed. So that is definitely one of the reasons why I love it. And it has to be a fresh story every year. So it also motivates me to start something new, much to many people's chagrin, because I'm always starting something new and never finishing it. But again, this makes me want to finish it too, because you have to hit that 20,000 word count by the end of the contest.
Well, I think one of the values, one of the best things about entering contests like this is it does make you put your butt in the chair and keep writing. I mean, even aside from winning contests or any other goals you might have, just participating, I think, is an end in itself. And I've actually not done the Open Novella Contest, but I've done a lot of other types of contests that I can talk about later, too. But with all of them, it always motivated me to keep writing.
I think that's something similar to me. Is that I one thing I love about the Open Novella Contest is that there are so many prompts that you get to choose from, that sometimes if I feel like I'm hitting like a slump in writing, or I want to write something new but I don't really know what to write, I love that when the ONC comes around, you're already going to be supplied with so many prompts and so much inspiration, so that you can use that for the ONC, you can use it for something else. And so I actually really enjoy getting to just come back, see what the prompts are each year, and then be inspired to write something and finish it in the time frame.
So motivation can easily come and go. How do you stay motivated to hit your ONC milestone markers?
Yep. So definitely the way that the ONC is set up is that you have the three milestones. You have the 2,000 words first, you have 8,000, and then you have the 20,000 minimum. Um, so, and I have been someone who has not only completed but also dropped out because of whether a prompt didn't reach me right. I just didn't have the motivation. Life got in the way, and that's okay. We'll get into that later. But for me, having those different milestones is a goal, and I'm a very goal oriented, deadline driven person. So it definitely helps me to be able to break up the work a little bit better that way, to better use my time, knowing that, okay, I have this date to get 2,000 words done. Usually more often than not, that's the easiest part, because then you got to go to the 8,000. I'm like, okay, so by the time I finish the 2,000, I'm already working towards that extra 6,000 to hit that next milestone. So knowing what's coming up, knowing what I have to do, knowing what's expected of me in the future because of it, definitely does help me plan my time better. And by planning my time, more often than not, I'm able to hit that goal a lot easier than if I was just doing it without any motivation like that.
MB said that so well. I think it's that's it. And again, and brought up an important point too, that don't beat yourself up if if what it says, your reach exceeds your grasp. If you can't get it done, you can't get it done. Try again next time. And there's value in just entering the contest and working. And even if you only got 5,000 words down, that's 5,000 words you've got. And you can either do something with that in the future, or it's like anything else. Like, the more you write, the better writer you become. Even if you don't end up using it.
So one thing for me to stay motivated that I found was that not only, if I guess, following the milestones, but making my own kind of schedule for it. I found that I can't just aim for the 2,000 words, because you realize it starts incrementally going up more and more words that you need to do. So if you only do the 2,000 by the end of the month, then you suddenly have to do 6,000 the next month and even more by the end. So for me, it's really about making a schedule and being like, okay, I'm going to plan to format my novella to be around maybe 12 chapters, a chapter a week, and I can aim to write a chapter a week. And then that becomes my motivation to just say, write a chapter a week. And that usually will get me to the goal at the end. And having that schedule and knowing that this is going to be my ONC writing day to do some writing, I'm going to write my chapter. That's kind of, it's something to look forward to every week, that I've set aside this time to work on this. And then I know I'm going to post it this day. And that's what gives me the motivation. And there's also such a great community that people will read each other's stories during the ONC. And that's a motivation itself, because other people want to see what you're writing in that contest. And I find that it's so collaborative, and everyone who's involved seems to be reading each other's work. So that's another bit of motivation.
Those are all lovely pieces, yes. And when it comes to motivation, have you ever found a difference in where you write or when you write? It's like in your own home, the office, in transit. Have these ever had an effect on your ONC?
Yeah, I can definitely say that I can write when I'm at home, but I write very slowly. I get very distracted. I may write a couple words here and there and then go and want to play a game or just watch a YouTube video. So for me to actually really get my focus done, kind of like Bianca, you set the time aside to make sure that I'm going to do this writing on this day. But for me, I have to up and leave my house. Usually, like, I go to a local coffee shop far enough away from my home so that I actually have to make a trip to make sure that I have everything with me. There's no, oh, I forgot my charger, let's go back home. No, everything's with me. And I can usually spend a good few 4 or 5 hours sitting down with a cup of coffee and just getting the words out. But for me, I have to have that specific focus or I will get very distracted otherwise.
Well, the way I've written really was impacted a lot by COVID, because I used to, before COVID, I would go to my office in the morning at my regular day job. And I'd usually go out at lunchtime, and I'd go to a local restaurant, take my laptop, and I would write at lunchtime. So I'd write for like an hour or an hour and a half if I had extra time that day. And I kind of liked that structure. But then COVID hit, and all of a sudden I was working from home. So I've gotten a lot more scattered and kind of lost that particular time to write, because there's no defined break in my day. And now I kind of find myself often like really tired at night, staying up and trying to write. And sometimes I try to get up in the morning and do it, but I'm not a morning person. So that's something I'm still kind of struggling with, is making sure I do fit writing into my day now.
Yeah. So like Jane, things changed a little bit during COVID. The first ONC that I participated in was the 2021. So the month of February, the contest was ongoing. And so I used to go to a cafe pretty regularly on Saturdays or so. And that would be the day that I would work. And then once all of the restrictions started coming into place, I could no longer do that. So I had to finish up the ONC that year in my apartment. And I do, now that things have kind of relaxed a little bit, I do prefer going to a cafe if I'm able to. I do find that I focus a little bit better there. It helps me to really set aside that time. And I'll often like not log into the Wi-Fi at the coffee shop to really like force me to actually spend time instead of getting distracted and clicking on something else like I'll do when I'm home. But I do try, I can write at home if I need to, particularly for like editing. After I kind of will write the chapter later in the week, I like to edit it, and I'll usually do that at home. It's just a little bit easier for me.
And so, of the ONC novels that you have done, which one do you think you did the best, and why would you say it was the best?
Let's see. So like I said, I judged the first two. I participated in the last four. I'll be participating again this year once it starts back up again February 1st. Of the ones that I finished, so that was 2019 and 2021. I think my first one, Celtic Cross, was the one that I really enjoyed writing the most. It was a tarot-based mystery thriller, and enjoying the tarot myself, it brought me back to that. And I actually did a lot of research with it, both with my own readings, and I worked with a friend of mine who reads cards professionally, and sat down with him. I remember, again, before everything shut down, it was like the year before that. And, I'm like, okay, I need these cards to be pulled to read these things. What kind of a spread can I make? And so having that interaction with my friend and working through the story, it just was something really different that I hadn't written before. And I really, really enjoyed it. And it seemed to work because that was the year that I won the third place overall on it. So I really do. I enjoy that story, and I hope that I can find another prompt again in the future to have that connection to as we go forward.
Well, I have never done the ONC contest actually, but I've done a lot of contests through the Romance Writers of America and other outside contests. And kind of the one that was interesting to me was a contest I won. It was put on by the Saskatchewan Romance Writers. And the idea of the contest was hook us in one page. So you had to write one page. And I won that contest, and then I later wrote the whole book on Wattpad, and that's Paradise Thriller, which is one of my I paid stories. But it really made me focus on how much extraneous stuff we sometimes have at the beginning of the book. And that if you actually knew, and I think now ever since then I've kind of written every book like that, where I want to make it so if somebody only had one page to read, would I pull them into the story? So just being in that contest really kind of changed how I looked at writing and get right to the hook, right to the point, and pull the reader in. And I think that's true of whether you're writing for a contest or whether you're just writing in general.
I know Bianca wrote one that she later expanded and that won a Waddies. But Bianca, which one do you think you did the best and why?
I definitely think it was that book. That was my 2021, which was called Dangerous Thoughts. And I remember I really liked the prompt. The prompt was under, I think, like this sci-fi section of ONC, but I decided to make it more fantasy based. And I went for like a Victorian fantasy kind of style, and really wanted to try to make the characters interesting and also a kind of a mystery plot as part of it. Um, Something that I thought was interesting was that, like, by the third chapter, I was trying to figure things out in my mystery, and some of the readers were guessing already, kind of some plot twists that I was going to be making. So I decided to then make that misdirection and change things up, and that actually really was helpful in keeping people guessing throughout the story. So when it was time that the contest was over, I think that one shortlisted in the ONC that year. I decided to then work on expanding it. So I fleshed it out, added some subplots because there was a lot of stuff that I tried to I want to write during ONC, but you can't. It's a novella, and then I submitted it for the Waddies this year, and it won in the fantasy category. So that was probably my favorite one that I did for the ONC.
That's definitely a fun story. So, but as you say, we can expand them, but also a novella, particularly for contests, will often have a limited word count. And if you're like many people who like to type forever and a half, it can be very hard to condense an entire plot into about 20,000 words. So how do you make every word count?
So I am myself a fast drafter. So novellas are ideal for me, to a sense where it's plot. It's no like Ben said, no subplots, no pretty prose. It is, here's our characters, here's what's going on, here's what they have to go through, and here's how they're going to resolve it. And you have 20,000 words to do it. At least 20,000. They allow up to 40,000 to keep it within the novella range, but your story must be completed by the due date. I never have really exceeded 20,000 much. But again, just because I'm a pantser too. So I start writing, I usually get that first 2,000 words in, and that's where I know my story is going to go. Like, this is like, okay, we're going to hit it off. Like Jane said, can you wow them in a page? Can you wow them in 2,000 words? So those 2,000 words really are my starting point, and that's where I'm just, okay, this is it. You guys are going to go in, realize what's happening with the story, and then I have the other 18,000 words to flesh that out. So for me, keeping it within the novella length actually is ideal. It's when I have to think about expanding it into a novel size that will take me a little bit longer.
A few things. One thing, I think if I'm writing a novella, then pick a genre that doesn't require extensive world building, because you just don't have the space and the words to set that up. Another thing that can be a good idea is pick a genre that has already set reader expectations. Something like mystery or romance, because it's kind of a shortcut because the readers know what direction you're going to be going. Avoid excessive subplots because you're just not going to have the space to tie them all up. Give the characters clear motivation. And I also think one thing that it sounds ironic, because usually we say, oh, avoid stereotypes and cliches, but this is one time when they can really help you. And I'm not talking about, bad stereotypes, about whole groups of people, but things like, you want to describe this one secondary character. You might say he was the kind of old man who yells at kids to stay off his lawn. And everybody knows what kind of person that is, and you don't have to go into a whole lot about, okay, this guy didn't really get along with his neighbors, he really doesn't like kids, he's set in his ways. You can condense that. So if you can think of something with your characters to paint a short picture from popular culture or just anything where the readers will get it, then you're going to save that space for the important parts of your story, and it'll keep the pace up.
For me, I think some of it has to do with the schedule, and that's how I kind of keep things narrowed. I know for myself when I do the ONC, I really am aiming for like a 12 chapter story, because that's my schedule, is that I try to write one chapter a week. So when I start writing, I'll usually kind of get inspiration for like the first chapter. And then as I'm writing that, I start trying to just jot out a very basic outline of where I think things are going. So I know chapter 2, hopefully we'll have this happen, 3, and this happened. And by having like a very basic outline, and I've written enough now that I know how many plot points I can fit into a chapter without it being too long, then that helps me kind of stay within the limits for the ONC, and also kind of come up with a cohesive story in that amount of time and not go too far over.
No, that's very good, using one chapter a week to keep on schedule. Very good scheduling tip. Okay, and now we're going to touch back to what Jane touched on with genres. Do you think there's certain genres that might actually work better for the ONC contests or other anthology contests, or other plot tricks that you might have for somebody trying to write one?
Yeah, so Jane hit it right on the head. Fantasy is hard to write. Um, and I can confirm that because of the two novellas that I didn't finish, they were both fantasy, which is my wheelhouse, but trying to world build and create a feeling of fantasy in such a short time, at least for me, was more difficult than, say, a contemporary. So for me, I will look at the different plots, but try to keep it in a more contemporary setting. That doesn't mean that I won't go paranormal. That doesn't mean I won't go, thriller mystery, but I do keep it in a world that more or less has already been set. Current day, easy enough. Don't need to fill too many people in on what a cell phone is, so it does make things a lot easier when it comes to having that short amount of time and the short amount of words than you would for a normal novel.
I think it's possible to do fantasy. I think it's just like you have to make your choices about what type of fantasy you want it to be. Um, I think that's why my ONC story that I chose like a Victorian style fantasy. So it really felt more like it was set in, like in 1800s England. And then I introduced a magic system, and that was basically the extent. I didn't have to do extensive world building. So I think if you want to do fantasy for ONC, you can, but you just have to know that there's definitely going to be some constraints on what you can write in it so that you don't go over. But I tried for my second ONC one to do a completely different thing, and that was much, much harder. And I felt like there wasn't enough, definitely. And I finished it, but it was definitely missing a lot of the flavor and the color that I would want to be in a really good fantasy novel.
No, I just think for writing for ONC, there are certain genres that are going to be easier, but I don't think that should stop you from writing, fantasy, like Bianca said. I think you just have to go into it realizing that that part's going to be a challenge, and kind of have a plan for how you're going to get the information that you need to the reader and still have enough space in this page constraints.
So you can definitely have to watch our plots, our settings, our characters. But now we're going to touch on how do you best hook a reader, especially when it comes to anthologies where they usually have less of an attention span. So, how would you hook our readers into something like this?
So one of the things that I have learned as a reader and a writer, and an editor of platform, is, that not necessarily even that first chapter, but that, again, that first page, even that first line, that first paragraph. If you can really, bam, come out running, come out with, knives flying, and then, everything, you get those readers as soon as you can. Um, if you can't get them by the first chapter, then I would start over. If That's why I think those 2,000 words for the open novella contest are what, makes or breaks, a lot of people in it, because you have to hit them. You got to be like, okay, we know what this prompt is going to be about. We kind of have an idea of what's coming. We want to know more, and that's what that initial, here it is, so taking those 2,000 words and really being able to grab a reader, that's going to be the goal. Like, you have to have an idea and be able to be like, you want to keep reading this, like, to be continued, stay tuned. Like, you want people to be on the edge of their seat waiting for those next updates.
Yeah, I think anytime, like MB said, you just got to hook them in fast and, even on the first page if possible. I think it helps anytime you can have a high concept that somebody immediately gets. I mean, think about what you're writing and, think about an ad for a movie. If you can imagine like a one-liner and people know instantly, yeah, that's about. That's going to help you. Because you're going to be able to capture their attention early and hopefully keep it. Also, I think when you're writing to a prompt, it helps to kind of think outside the box a little bit and see if you can twist it a little so that it's different, from what people expect. That can help intrigue a reader too. So if the reader's getting from the prompt kind of what they expected, but it's a little different. And then they want to keep reading and find out what you do with it.
Jane, what you're saying about writing something that's a little bit different, that reminds me actually of a contest that was on Wattpad back in like 2016. It was a Holly Black contest that she did where she was judging. It was like flash fiction. So to enter, all you had to do was write a quick story, and it was in the comments of this book on Wattpad. And so it was very easy to enter. A lot of people were entering, and the only prompt was a deal with the devil. And a lot of people, I remember, because you could read other people's entries before you wrote, were writing things that were very well written, but they were all very similar to what you would expect in that. And I still remember to this day, the winner wrote something that was completely different, that really stood out, that definitely caught, Holly Black's attention. And so I do think that that's something interesting, and to think about writing something a little bit different to really catch both the reader's interest, maybe to catch the judge's interest, if you're going in a direction that maybe is not expected.
And that's a very good segue into my next point is, what do you recall being the most memorable opening in one of the ONCs or anthologies or even a regular novel? Which one sticks out the most in your mind as being unique and just comes to mind immediately?
No, I'm thinking about this one. I'm trying
You're
to figure that one
stumping
out.
us, Crystal.
I know. For once, I don't have anything to say.
Mean something unique in one of our own stories? Is that what you're asking?
Or any story. Is there anything you remember, any sort of opening line or opening setting in any ONC anthology? It comes to mind like, oh yeah, that was unique.
Well, going back to Holly Black, and I believe it was The Cruel Prince. Like, wasn't there something like, maybe not the first line or the last line of that prologue, like, there's no macaroni and cheese and fairy. It was, and of course, you read more why, but like, that's just a line in like the very beginning of that book that I'm like, okay. So for better or for worse, it's like that one that actually like stuck with me, even though it has nothing to do with macaroni and cheese as the series goes on. But you just remember that one line.
Nothing else stands out. No other unique openings you can remember.
I can't really think of one line off the top of my head.
All I can think of is there's one contest I wrote, or I think it was a novel actually, where the first opening line was like, I never thought I'd be going to an interview with no underwear or something. And it was like, okay, that's a different take on it. Okay, so let's move it along. So let's move on to anthologies. Those are a little bit different. And so as to how they might be different from your regular prompt-based storytelling, Jane, you mentioned you did join 5 anthologies and you're currently on your 6th one. Can you please share your
That's
experiences?
right. Yes, and I'm part of the one that's coming out from Wattpad and WritersConnX in February, the Monstrous Love Anthology. And there's a huge variety and everything from sweet romances to really, really sexy stories. And you can just imagine all the different types of monsters, but it's all tied together. And I think that's what's important and everyone should watch for that one too. February 1, the first stories start releasing, and we'll be releasing, a few stories a day through Valentine's Day. So and it was interesting with that one, just trying to think of a new take, and where to go with writing about monsters. And when you're writing for an anthology, it's a little different than writing for ONC, where you're really more concerned just with writing your story the way you want to. But for an anthology, it's all got to kind of hang together. And so your story has to work with the other stories that are in the anthology, but at the same time, you want it to stand out. So, I think that let's get back to what I mentioned earlier about trying to find a little twist, because a lot of anthologies have a prompt. I was in the Paid Stories anthology. I think it was back 2 years ago. I've lost track of time during COVID. It all runs together. But there was the one that got away, and what you initially think about when you're thinking about the one that got away is somebody's romance, the person that they never connected with, and maybe it'll be a reunion. I did something a little different for mine. I decided to write kind of a literary fiction piece about an elderly woman who's looking back over her life and wondering what happened to a certain person that she knew, not a romantic, thing, but somebody she knew. And I added a twist at the end because it seemed like that was the one that got away during the story. But it ended up that she's thinking about looking back over her life, and she had never gone to college, and she had gotten married, and her life had gone by, and now she's in her 70s, and she starts thinking about going back to school and doing something else with her life, and that maybe she would be the one that got away from just the life that everybody else had lived in her Philadelphia row houses, where they just kind of retired, got old, and didn't really do anything much more. But so that was kind of fun for me because it stayed with the prompt, but it wasn't what people were maybe expecting. So I think you need to do that when you're writing for an anthology. Again, think what's going to make my story stand out, but not go so far that it doesn't fit the prompt anymore. Because you can twist the prompt, but you can't toss it out the window. That's the advice I would have for writing for prompts, in an anthology, is just try to come up with something that's cohesive, but at the same time brings a new element to the table.
And for those who aren't familiar with anthologies, roughly what's the word count in the average anthology?
It can vary, but it's usually around 2500, something between 2500 to 5000 words. And I think the one we're doing now is, I believe, around 3500 words per story. So you've got to write tight to write a story in that. But I'd encourage everybody to get in anthologies if you can, and kind of flex your writing muscles. And I mean, I have written so many different things in anthologies. For Wattpad, I've done that literary fiction I just talked about. I wrote a vampire story. I did a romantic comedy. I wrote a teen horror story. And now I wrote a sexy short, and I've done the monster story now. And it's really fun to write something different. And it's not the investment. That's kind of like ONC too. You can write a novella. You're not making that investment of time to write a full-length book, but you can use it as a chance to write something that isn't what you normally write.
And Bianca and MB, have either of you done much in the way of anthologies? And what can you tell us about your experiences with them?
You want to go, Bianca?
Yeah. So I actually am also a part of this upcoming anthology that we're doing with WritersConnX, and this was, I think, my first one. And so I signed up kind of at the last minute, and it was like during a period of time where I suddenly found myself a little bit more free time, and I was like, you know what, I think I want to really just take the opportunity just to write something new. And I think I was able to write my piece in about 2 days. It was from, I used like an old idea that I had floating around, and it was really just fun. It was a fun way to like be inspired by the prompt, to take something that I had been thinking about writing in the past but hadn't really known what to do with it. It was definitely a little tricky, the word count situation, and it is, our anthology is going to be monster but also a little bit of romance, and so it can be a little bit hard for me to get to the romance in such a short word count. But it was definitely a really good challenge. It was really fun to work with other people also and kind of see a little bit so far of what their stories are. We haven't actually seen most of the other people's yet, but we have seen glimpses of like quotes and like what monsters perhaps that they are involving in their story, or their spiciness level of their story. And so it's been a really fun kind of thing to be a part of. And it was something that I definitely wasn't used to, but I've been really much enjoying.
As much as I love me some monster love, I just was unable to get this anthology into my schedule this year, which is very sad for me. But I have written in anthologies before. I've done a few on Wattpad. I've done a few off platform, and again, the short story, smaller word count is too small for me. I find myself having a hard time getting an arc done in such, a couple thousand words. So the ones I have done though are inspiring, and I've actually ended up writing full length novels off of them. So back, was it 2016, 2017, I was part of a user run anthology on a profile, and the theme was you have to write about going to a party and a celebration, but something goes horribly wrong. And so that was actually the inspiration beginning for my Wattpad novel, Lady Mutiny, because it was about I had an assassin who gets caught. And so that really sparked the rest of the book. So for me, I love writing anthology shorts because they usually are ideas that I have that I can use later. So there again, there's that 2000 like starting chapter to jump off that I think that's what a great like short story can do. Would be like, even if you finish that arc and like that beginning, like you have a whole world that you can play with if you ever want to go back to it some other day.
And what was your favorite anthology and why?
Oh my gosh, my favorite anthology is usually whatever one I'm working on the most recently. I have loved like being part of all the Wattpad anthologies.
Yeah.
I can't really pick one. I've liked every one because in every one, it's given me a chance to write something totally different. And actually, beyond that, the best part I think is that I get to know all the other writers in the anthology so much better, and I read their stories and comment, and they comment in mine, and we kind of, and we look at each other's work beyond the anthology too. It's introduced me to some other writers on Wattpad that I might not have seen before because maybe they write in genres I don't normally read, but they pulled me in with their short stories. So that's been the best thing, for me. And I guess, the right now my favorite is the Monstrous Love anthology. Because I'm really excited about that, and I'm excited to read Bianca's story and what everybody else is putting in there.
Bianca, do you have a favorite?
This is my first one, so I can't say.
No?
So
This is your favorite by default then.
yes, yes, it's true.
2 votes for Monstrous Love.
Yes.
I mean, I got nothing to say, but I do enjoy anthologies that are seasonally themed. Like we did a Halloween one a few years ago, which was awesome. And then there's always like a holiday one that comes out, and then now with like a Valentine's Day one, even though it's Monstrous Love, and that's awesome. But I do like just to seeing how, again, different themes can all come together, like Jane said, as in a cohesive, anthology, even though everyone has their own little story to tell with the same prompt.
And we already mentioned that word count was one particular challenge of anthologies, but are there any other challenges, and how do you overcome them?
I think time management is big. Even if you're not writing for the ONC for an anthology, there's always a due date that you have to have something in by. At least with the ONC, ahead of time what those goals are and what those due dates are. But so it's a personal thing about how you're going to be able to get those words written in that allotted amount of time. So for me, that definitely is always a challenge, because life gets busy. So, listening to Bianca talk, I actually might take her advice and, instead of just going, milestone by milestone by milestone, look at the whole picture and try to break it down chapter by chapter. So yeah, time management in addition to word count, for at least definitely for me is a way that it's definitely something I need to overcome.
I think for me, it would be what I mentioned earlier, just coming up with that twist that's going to make your story unique. I mean, it's, and yeah, that's maybe a little easier this time with the monstrous love one because there's so many different kinds of monsters you could write about. It's a kind of a broader prompt, but a lot of times it's just coming up with something that's going to fit the theme of the anthology, but that's going to stand out and be a little different from the other stories. And it's like, it doesn't take me long to write the story. Once I start writing it, it's like spend, weeks thinking about it and trying to figure out what my twist is going to be. That's the hard part for me more than the actual writing.
And I think it's also something that I struggle with is just because it is shorter, making sure that I try to get into what I want to get into and making sure I have enough time for the things that I want to accomplish. Um, that was definitely something that I struggled with this one was trying to get to the love, but also having to explain what was going on, like why is there a monster or what's going on in this situation to get to that point. So that was definitely hard, was trying to kind of hit the plot points that I wanted to hit within the word count, to make it make sense. And so that was something that I thought was a little bit harder with this anthology.
This is probably going to be fairly similar to the ONC, but this is even shorter for the anthology, which puts a little more stress on like which genres you can write in easily. Bianca, I know it's your first time, but have you had any comments about what kind of genres might be easier in the shorter word count?
Things that would be easy. I think for me, I really struggled with the romance aspect. I'm going to be honest. I'm definitely someone who's more of a slow burn kind of person. My story is definitely not one of the spicier stories in the anthology. So for me, but obviously there's 34 other writers who were able to really, I think, to do romance and things like that. So I'm not saying that romance you can't do it in an anthology, but for me that was personally something a little bit harder, just because the type of romance that I've written in the past has been extremely slow burn and lots of build up. But that's not to say that other people can't do romance. It seems that everyone else, was doing romance and we had a great time with it in the anthology. But it's something personally that I recognize I struggled with.
No, I think it's just the challenge too of writing something that may be outside of what your normal wheelhouse is too, and then having those moments of, because I'd never written a monster story before, like at all, and so I'm having these moments of, there's a whole world of readers out there who read monster stories, and they're going to think I'm an idiot because my story is not going to be anything like it. And, just kind of worrying about that. And I was on Google and on Wattpad looking up monster stories just to see kind of what kind of things people wrote. So I think you're always a little nervous when you're writing something in a genre you haven't written before. But I'd recommend, to do a little research, but don't let that stop you, because you can really expand, your abilities as a writer when you take on something like that.
Very similar to what Jane just said, do your research. Like, you need to write a monster love story. Let's go look for some monster love stories to read. I mean, nothing said you can't read what you want to write. So even if it is a challenge, like same for me, like if I'm jumping into something and it's not a genre that I'm usually used to or not 100% comfortable with, I'll just do a quick search on Wattpad and say, brace myself, but I'll do a quick search on Wattpad, that's in the genre that I'm going to try to jump into, and just to get a feeling for how people, tackle it, so to speak. Yeah, I'm killing myself that I'm not in this monster love thread right now, guys. I'm not lying.
We wish you were there, MB.
I do too.
Yes, we'll definitely have to see how many good stories come out of the anthology, because I'm sure there's a lot of them. There's been quite a bit of hype over on the WXC area. Okay, but when it comes to writing contests in general, do you have any tips on preparing for the rigors of writing a contest or gathering information? I know, MB, you mentioned you were a pantster. Do you have any sort of preparation or more work in the revision area? How do you work these?
Yep. So being a pantser, I just write. The only thing I generally do know is where I want a story to end. So at least if, even though I'm pantsing my way through it, I know where my final end goal needs to be. So that's always a good thing. Know the story you want to tell, and then the story that you want to finish. Um, so that will be my advice. Pantsers, plotters, planters, whatever you want to be, just make sure you know the story that you want to tell by the end of the day.
For ONC in particular, or when I'm trying to plan it, I kind of will be inspired by a prompt, and then I'll kind of let myself, at least at the beginning, try to just like let the thoughts come to me. I don't try to jump in right away. I usually try to give myself a couple of days, but I try to keep my phone nearby or something that I can write on. I remember like I was doing something where I had to be up at like 5 a.m. and I was like walking in a parking lot in the middle of February, and suddenly I had an idea and I just pulled out my phone, and it was like, freezing outside, and I was just jotting things down to just, so I keep that near me so I can kind of think about things for a little bit during that first week. And then as I start writing, I always say that I'm like a plant stir. I'll usually the beginning is a little bit more pantsy, and then as things kind of fell into place, then I'll make my outline kind of partway through. And the outline's pretty vague; it's not super detailed, but that helps me kind of stay on track. It helps me come up with my ideas, and then as things kind of fill in, then the story kind of goes that way.
Yeah, I'm a pure pantser like MB too, and right to the end. I'm always surprised where my stories go. I mean, I do know in general. I write a lot of romance, so when you're writing romance, you're going to have a happy ending. So I know that these people are going to get together, but sometimes I have no clue how, because I try to set it up and make it as impossible a conflict as I can, and then I just start writing. So, but with contests, I mean, there's really two types. There's contests like ONC, where the idea is that you're writing as you're going, you're writing something new. There's a lot of other contests out there where you're entering maybe a project that you've already written. And I think when you're doing that, pay attention to what the parameters of the contest are. I mean, because I've seen people, and I used to judge a lot of contests, and I would be like so annoyed. Like if it was submit 20 pages, for example, or a specific word count, and people would stop like right in the middle of a sentence because they hit that, last line on page 20. I'm like, no, fix it. You should always, if it's a limited page count for a limited word count for a contest for a story that you have more of, make sure you end it on a hook. And you don't have to go right up to the last word of the word count. I mean, what you want, you want to end it at a spot that makes the reader want more. So I think that's an important thing. And I used to enter a lot of contests where I was entering the same, first chapter or first few chapters of a book in multiple contests. And it looked different for every contest because it depended on how many pages they wanted and what their focus was. And if it was, the contest was really looking for characterization, then I was going to really beef that up in the part that I was entering. So just, my advice would be if you're writing for if you're entering a contest where it's a project you've already been writing, just make that contest entry the best you possibly can. Forget about the whole book. Make that entry really fit the contest.
And so, like, finishing a story is always great, as is entering the contest. They're huge causes for excitement. But what if you don't finish it, or if it gets too big to qualify, or you don't win, or you don't get accepted? How do you get past the disappointment and the often inevitable imposter syndrome? MB, you've done lots of these contests. You want to give us a start off?
Yeah, as someone who definitely has had moments where, not winning or just not finishing, I mean, you just have to assess your own personal abilities. Can you get 20,000 words written in the span of 3 months? You're talking to someone who has done NaNoWriMo with 50,000 in 30 days. But I have had these contests, like this ONC twice I started, and I just could not, for one reason or another, continue. And it stunk. I'm seeing, these lists keep coming out and people winning, and I'm like, man, I really would have loved to keep writing. But life happens, and sometimes there's a reason for it. Not saying that I can't ever go back to writing those stories ever again, and that's something that I think anybody who enters these contests has to remember is that you had an idea, you started. It's words like Jane had mentioned. It's words you didn't have before. And nothing says that you can't go back to them again. You can't write them again. And so that's just something that people should definitely keep in mind. Also, you can't win everything, and you really can't. I mean, that's just how it is. Winning is great, winning is nice, but just because you don't win doesn't mean that you just throw your hands up and say, well, I'm done forever. Contests are very subjective. ONC is subjective. There are judges. Whenever there's a judge, somebody's opinion is not going to always be your own or align with your views and whatever you present to them. So you always have to go in with that in mind, take it all with a grain of salt, and carry on. It doesn't end here. It is a contest. It's fun to win, but even if you don't, you got a new story. Take it and run with it, and it could be the best piece of work you've ever written.
Yeah, I agree with what MB just said. And it's, and don't let not winning a contest pull you into imposter syndrome. I mean, just kick that BS in the butt, I mean, it's like, throw it out. I mean, there's a lot of great stories that don't win the contest. There's a lot of luck involved in contests. And just because it's a great story doesn't mean it's going to win. Like MB said, it is very subjective. And, and also remember too that when you don't win a contest, it's not you being rejected. It's just one story that you wrote that didn't win a contest. You didn't lose, you just didn't win. And, again, you just can't take it personally. One of my favorite books about writing is Stephen King's On Writing. And he talks about he used to keep like this nail up in the ceiling, like in his attic, and stick all the rejection letters on it until it filled up the nail, and he had to start another one. And yeah, aren't we all glad that he didn't just give up when someone's when 5, 10, 15, 20, I don't know how many, of his stories got rejected. I think just, I used to belong to a local writing group. It was a chapter of the Romance Writers of America. And at the end of every meeting, we would ask everybody to stand up if they had just gotten a rejection, if they had gotten a rejection from a publisher. And people who got a rejection from a publisher would stand up and we would all applaud. Because that's the whole idea was, you're never going to get published if you don't put it out there. And it's the same with contests. The only way to be sure you're never going to win is if you never enter. So, just keep on trying and celebrate every time there's a rejection, or every time you enter a contest and you don't win, because now you have a novella, or you have a part of a novella, and you're a better writer, and you got something out of it. You set a goal and you work toward it. And all of those are really great things. So it's not just about winning. I mean, we're all going to win sometimes and not win, sometimes. There's a lot of great writers. We all can't win. I mean, if the 4 of us entered a contest together and there's one winner, one of us is going to win. It doesn't mean the other 3 of us suck, so you just can't take it personally.
Yeah, a lot of times with these contests, I have to remind myself that there's so many people who are entering. ONC is pretty big. Waddies are huge, things like that. There's so many people in there, so I try to go in. Of course, it'd be great to win, but knowing that, just given the likelihood, I probably won't. And so for me, it's a lot about just the experience of doing it, and I try to focus on that. And then the things that I've written in the past for contests that have not won have then turned into other things. So that Holly Black contest I was talking about, the flash fiction, the one paragraph that I wrote, I ended up turning into a novel. And that was like on the Waddy shortlist in like 2018. And that was something that I was really proud of. And then, my ONC piece, that one made it to the shortlist. It didn't win. It didn't get an honorable mention, but I was able to turn it into something that, later won a Waddy. And so you can definitely take these, lows or these not winning times and then turn them into something productive, turn it into a piece that you like. One of my ONC pieces, I decided not to expand afterwards. And it's still, though, a piece of work that today I got comments on Wattpad, which I thought was so random because it's not one of my well-known pieces. And someone was like, I really enjoyed this. And it was just, you can still make things that don't win that people can enjoy, or things that you've created that you can turn into something new. So that's how I view kind of all these contests.
Indeed. Every contest we enter is a few more words written in their story we have. Another thing could be like judges might even have personal preferences. Like some people absolutely love triangles, some do not. So your story could be great. It might just not be what that judge might have been looking for. So simply entering is still a win. but do you guys have any other tips or tricks for writing or entering contests?
One last thing I recommend is for the ONC, they usually will divide the prompts into different categories. Like this is the children's, prompts. These are more like middle grade. This is more the fantasy prompts. These are the romance prompts. And I would say that something that I found that would be helpful for ONC is to not always view the prompt as exactly what it's listed as or the category it's in. For this contest, they're supposed to be able to recognize the prompt in your story, but that doesn't mean that it has to be 100% exactly the romance prompt that it is listed at. So that's something that I recommend, and it helps kind of keep your story fresh, and it might give you a different type of inspiration.
Yeah, definitely make sure you know your prompt too. And one of the good things with ONC is that, like Bianca said, there are so many. So give yourself some time to actually go through them. What I do is I actually just go through them, and my first pass, I write down the ones I like. And then I look at those, and so I don't feel overwhelmed. Because again, there are a lot. And if you keep, I like this one, and maybe I like this one, and maybe I like that one. The cool thing is you can do more than one in the same story. You just have to make sure that you can show them, because you do have to state what the prompt is so the judges can go and be like, oh yeah, that's what this story is about. But it doesn't mean that you are set to just that one. You can add more. So if you find multiple prompts that you are really, connected to, try to weave them in the best you can. But also don't feel like you have to. And, don't feel like you see one prompt, you're like, I'm going to write that. This is what I have to do. And then you start writing it. You're like, oh no, you can change it. I mean, that's why those first 2,000 words are great, because if you start a story that isn't fitting this prompt, but you look at the others, you're like, oh, well, maybe it's better for this one. You have that little bit of flexibility, but make sure you know the prompt you want, because once you get deeper into the story, it's going to be a lot harder to change it up.
My advice would be just don't be intimidated about it. I mean, jump in and try it. I mean, there's no rule that says you have to finish it. There's certainly no rule that says you have to win it. It's just by writing on Wattpad and by entering a contest like ONC, you are so far ahead of the game. I mean, think about how many people walk around saying, well, someday I'm going to write a book, and they never do. And how many people start a book and never finish it. And, just being a writer on Wattpad and doing contests like this is something you really should pat yourself on the back for. I mean, that's an accomplishment in itself, and it's kind of it's great to win, but I think it's the real value is just in doing it and joining this whole huge community that does ONC and that writes on Wattpad. And it's definitely worthwhile, and nobody should feel intimidated. If it's the first story you've ever written, don't feel intimidated. Just go for it. Because there's nothing to lose. And Wattpad is the least judgy place I've ever been around. I mean, everybody's going to support you, and, you don't have to write a Pulitzer Prize winning story like the first time you come out of the box. Just, it's a really supportive place to write. And the ONC is a great opportunity to do that for something that's longer than a short story, but not so long that it's going to, really weigh you down and take you a long time to finish. So go for it.
Awesome advice. So I think we're going to wrap this up with a big thank you to everybody who tuned in. It was great to have everybody here. And a huge thank you to our panelists. So much great information, so many tips, and so much experience. Please feel free to check out their profile for examples on these writing contests and other great books. So on Wattpad, Jane's username will be Jane Peden, NB is Druid Rose, and Bianca is B DeCoco. They have some other awesome books. Definitely check them out. And please stay tuned for our next panel, which can be found on the website, WritersConnX.com. Take care, and I hope you guys enjoy many more contests and anthologies. If you haven't joined, give them a try because they sound fun. And definitely check out the WriterConnX Monster Mash one when it comes out.